The United States federal government should enact domestic climate policy establishing the United States intended nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement as a restriction on private sector emissions of greenhouse gases in the United States. If any sport is warming, Trump is likely to withdraw the U.S. from Paris, but even if he doesn't, our pledge is not binding, which crushes global momentum and confidence in efforts to limit warming. Marina 16 journalists have downplayed consequences of Paris and Trump in the country after the United States automatically withdraws from Paris Agreement. Even this is called the end-use common action. Trump can ignore Obama's pledge. The use of Paris and function dissent on making single legislation has brought on a waving Paris effort. Promising me self-studying when it affects the methane and challenges realization. Trump's friends the narrative is confident because of its universal character. The fact that the U.S. is committed to reducing emissions. Paris could be labeled historic by dropping out the U.S. Turn Paris into a name breakaway and visions actually have to use back at implementation is a binding obligation to generate leadership necessary for a successful global climate framework. Legally binding targets heat limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius or lower. Chem 15 says that the argument meant on the U.S. for Christian youth ratification has become a selling block for international climate regime. While youth leadership necessary for such an international deal, the youth become unable to take federal steps or take international leadership role. The main reason for legally binding approach to global commitments on confidence delivery to those domestic legislation have become preferred more strongly charged to stabilize warming concept for greater credibility and stability for reliable framework for the public action and investment that were given the threat of infrastructure lock-in to require to be commissioned before 2020 investment would need to reduce the goals for credibility and stability. The only legal commitments can provide legally binding agreements only regarding the legitimacy of support still studying public states for giving the reasons to see the legally binding nature is necessary is a necessity. The U.S. does the global approach to INDC implementation refusal to make ours legally binding seemingly weak reversible commitment even though we'll definitely meet the INDC goal worth in 16. Paris has become the latest episode in the talk of war binding obligation. Paris are procedural involving important non-binding model with the Christian that internationally legally binding obligation costs are obvious and all important misreduction obligation use it and then to reduce 20% by 2025 by participants the U.S. step binding obligation uses this on non-binding most critical data from Paris need not have been this way. Existing authorities are commissioned to make the U.S. goal to be intention to submit except that the use by Paris even if the use is crucial and undertaking is only non-binding aspiration not governed by other forces. Other non-binding goals under Paris need only say the use implementation as a sole executive agreement with a non-binding INDC lost in the pledge review framework which guarantees 4 to 6 degree warming. Chem 15 pledge review involves non-binding pledge absolutely binding target being pledge review capable of having used participation as long as the executive agreement as long as there is the bottom of pledge review. The American version of even use participation in pledge review which is unlikely to be effective. The pledge review locking is the lowest competent non-binding behaviors exist with the pledge of 4 6 degrees Celsius exists pledge restraint policy and fact options increase mitigation costs make same targets on table pledge review that is the inadequacy of that argument to be avoided for the plan unlocks a virtuous spiral of increasing commitments by other countries only moving first reverses the history of U.S. foot tracking and demanding other countries act before we do. Bang 16 the U.S. is crucial in Paris to triggering action by other countries victims in such a case of commitments and knocks sexual lines on the key countries go first and have used brave walls as use appointed to make major struggle somebody the negotiations use as by the lack of participation all major for the time and like time give the most of countries shows their comments with this pleasure then domestic policy negotiation for the use is implemented the Senate interaction into executive legislation the defense scope use plus the house pay by use pay for affairs engage the role as they first move with the deal given more trouble norms and incentives Paris has disproportionate norms and forces that out with norms just like break the Paris maybe sort of someone to go if you simply do not expect the cooperative north limit for certification for lots of customs with lots of appropriate Paris a race to the top of it is a flop particularly if you try to move on to use the latest called global free riding setting a precedent of relying on future action locks in Roman participation is key to the success of the Paris Agreement for the future standards in 17th political office consult international mitigation and to with use for better treaty associated with global press central with Paris on native assessment could work to reach its targets that they did extend to human treaty associated with the fixed limits due to the time mission mental time scale of policy implementation aggressive this is about version system by the new mission may affect all of these legally use actions on affect other obligations but fear others will fear the main hurdles and negotiation China to get used in plans and affect after but India said they would delay produce mitigation in your time also use 450 billion tons of the US such percent the devil's future mission the only immediate act like the global effects actually sees the temperature targets Paris size and cross system they use elsewhere within the next 4 years may determine possible to limit climate change interacting tipping points are likely and uniquely catastrophic. Science 16 science studies says that multiple climate tipping points could occur this if climate change is automated most analysis and only simple unrealistic expectations international carbon action the climate opposite results simple IEMs by typical the Atlantic they agree that Arctic test Atlantic the Amazon and only El Nino past evolution so the results in GDP comparable with the Great Depression when they come out without generation these excessively high damages the living increase as the control emissions results in recommended system emission with limits warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius emissions reductions can limit climate change to below 2 degrees Celsius. Effective Paris implementation is the most important question for successful mitigation. Salowitz at 17. Climate catastrophe will occur by the end of the century basis with all RCB 8.5 if we did time for mission for table with both trees GCS losses emissions give the RCB 4.5 there's a 7 party there's 1.5 when we see the agreement the 9 party there's 2 will be achieved the FS commit some future emissions on Paris that were on coast receive emission follow just before below RCB 4.5 emissions are but nearly exactly by the depth of the average high temperature of all Paris but it's word on coast by the climate catastrophe unchecked climate change causes extinction by 2050 Sol 16 there's a sense that there's a short window reduced support addressing effects occur temperatures the average 10 enough by 2050. This is currently the structure of all life that will be permanent with rapid increase temperatures of the method properly by possibly station in natural side effect. The is not something that is worth the transportation of concept or could be seen the permanent around 2050. Unchecked warming causes the nuclear war magnifies every geopolitical impact. Chevron 16 climate change and different ecosystems all over the world. Doesn't matter what food migration disaster. Well, such as as it multiply this good. National security for hustle new putting into new weapons before support left on the space new global by accident discovery template petrol confidence by times to global starting tension and tension new global being used more nuclear the emission of 6 new global new global hold on dropping in global temperatures. Advantage 2 is leadership. Trump's failure to embrace Paris destroys U.S. diplomatic standing globally. Bledsoe and 16 Trump North climate change will pose high political diplomatic economic cause of national leadership. Trump's climate change to withdraw Paris will come and affect he measure a national one diplomatic 79 India Africa South America Asia become a national fundamental security economic drop Paris will only attack us in out to from the issue for any benefit to his officials when military comes to government best to see country region they serious supposed to come we have major global business from the use cross-border implementation of our Paris Agreement is key. Remaining in the agreement but dragging our feet causes isolation from global engagement. Light 126 Trump raised that's why the country will play the Eastern cooperate without countries policy put these thousands of Americans and 7,000 parties before Paris withdrawing response country now clearly assessing the countries to see global countries that promise whether they are good for the parties from broadly instructed honor commitments on defend difficult to engage on priority issues the same thing is not failure the honor commitments to the country global case and use in Paris while building it's not supposed to make also his place all when the country poses to prepare for investment cost the use of capital matters over hamstrung by users to address embracing Paris can actually build support and goodwill for U.S. and the internationally. Bailey 17 if from walk away from her to use loses but hold countries that come and transparency and ambition walk away is the president of the compromise political company if you're all they do and that's also confident that the entire international compromise couple for Paris with critical use credibility overseas I was really to provide forward to whether no national expression for the states requirements for renewable budgets they're popular and some of the CPB have the but the bonus are do more than require strong commitment to Paris builds diplomatic levers that the U.S. can use to drive global action across a range of priorities terrorism cybersecurity and disease all these 17 ways were first economic alternative raise question whether you want to be doing national government you can probably down part of the administration effects for many countries but the levers with use and other negotiating contests of the famine in front of the web but use engagement and can facilitate deals on foreign policy barriers walking away from Paris being more difficult to work with countries on terrorism cybersecurity pandemics well other issues high risk of nuclear terrorism causes nuclear war Patterson 16 of all of this will have most social security community a new connected by ISIS this is a drug American ISIS is scouting right for nuclear materials there's several openings requiring federal weapon agreement by we have to seal weapons for children by the cruise this is a far from active nuclear weapons on the port maritime and actually they have heard of nuclear weapon use to kill have a stories economically psychologically devastating and some using by using nuclear weapons actually the effects of much more of a cyber war as such great power conflict for all 16 trauma Africa and sometimes you have to navigate the company use Russian not use Russian or not war cyberspace protection vulnerable going work was to other actually they have to use here as well as they be put through something cost as first pandemics cause extinction variant okay failure to commit to Paris implementations, sparks a global anti-U.S. backlash, especially to a trade war, global recession, ROM 16, Trump exit Paris not able is when the country pulls out and we kill action, hold brother will become global priority, think sanctions against Russia times 10, will be used for drug headed, hope for the catastrophe going to using the compact to make the USA for ride, showing comprehension and terrorist authority to Europe to adopt comprehensive borders for the use, the message result to the special right to the terrorists who lose all the software and companies to be top on trade by 5 years for the more possible plus will be for the worst reasons our power South Africa, worst case will be consider business usually the future humanities on a knife's edge. Trump set on by Petro Salary said fair will get the trade war campaign on a global recession with no end. Global nuclear war Robini and 17 policies that hinder trade helps so that this is World War II potential retard wars America national Germany to Japan with the time they use and interface political confident access Trump maybe think use Russian numbers opposed to the rest of the like these on these countries within 40 economic stories that best invest in nuclear cases and American for policy drive best for economic military disaster. Solvency will meet the INDC no matter what and none of Trump's policies can affect the domestic fuel mix but the plan still solves warming because its retreat from Paris crosses global action goal 117. Trump's policy will be saved by Congress to favor trading some environmental protection mutilated by the launch of method and British also to studies with the intent by the citizens of nations and energy producers and unlike any Trump's policy have been to be useful in Congress the efficiency policy meeting the Paris Agreement to huge humanity active drugs and the town of coal investment rules by business the CP with 2016 U.S. renewable standard business trading and using Paris business as usual. Pandemics?
Yeah.
Extinction Program 16. The passage I have has an implication for research and long transportation include natural levels on titles for global injuries, long transportation, and critical transportation being used when it comes to stable extinction with global transportation tips that may be approaching a critical threshold. That corresponds to a critical threshold. That was the disease impact on the other activity.
Cool. Alright, ready?
Yep.
Okay, sweet. So first, what is the intended nationally determined contribution?
It's a commitment to reduce our emissions 26 to 28% by 2025 below 2005 levels.
Okay, sure. So what does the F do?
The affirmative imposes a binding cap on U.S. emissions at that level.
Okay, so a binding cap on like specific industries, all industries.
Across the U.S., that could be implemented in many different ways. Our evidence says we're going to meet that target right now.
Okay, so I guess I need like a little more explanation. So the way that Paris works in the status quo is that it's like X country has to meet X amount of emission reduction.
Correct.
How do you do that for like entire sectors and like sections of? So do you parse out like this sector can only emit this much, this sector can only emit this much?
So top level claim is that most of this is a non sequitur, given that some emissions reductions will meet our INDC now. The question is that there's no binding cap on U.S. emissions to make that commitment a legal one.
Right. So I'm
our
wondering
evidence
where
says
the
that
cap
utilities
occurs.
are reducing their emissions, renewables are penetrating the market.
Do you mind if I answer like the question? I think the plan causes a review of kind of the existing emissions reductions that are occurring and creates a plan following that's based off of like what is currently existing, what threshold are we meeting, and then makes decisions about what sectors need to do what. The resolution only establishes that the plan has to do an economy-wide cap or that has to do a restriction on the private sector. We'd specify that we'd codify Paris essentially, which we think is a major shift from this.
Okay, so I guess if you codify Paris and you're only talking about things like the private sector, does the AF do anything to resolve like military emissions or like because
no,
those are
plan
all
text says private sector.
Paris. Okay, so it just excludes like those issues of Paris.
The plan text does not restrict them. We think further commitments later could restrict those emissions.
Yeah.
Because the point of the app is not to solve warming with the initial INDC. The point is to drive longer term, more durable Paris action, which we think definitely could include the military.
No, we can have a debate about whether like military stuff is privately contracted or not.
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of them are private contractors, so like there could be effects on the military.
Sure. Okay, so in a world in which like we have Trump, who has indicated rolling back things like the Clean Power Plan, all of those like disavowing trade agreements and things like that. Why is that not enough to like take out any sort of U.S. leadership? Like, what about
Paris? So the plan is a reversal from
specifically
those
is
things.
enough
Our
to
evidence says
solve that?
Paris is a critical international commitment. Making our commitment binding can demonstrate our willingness to follow through on international agreements
Okay,
and rebuild
so next
US
question, why
credibility.
do countries perceive it as binding?
What?
Why do countries like perceive it as
The
any
plan
different from the
as
status
binding?
quo? Yeah.
Because it's a law
Right.
passed in the U.S.
So
right now,
the U.S.
we
has
have
like left other treaties in the past and has abandoned things like that. Why wouldn't countries perceive it?
Yeah,
as
so the
anything?
Kemp evidence says that right now, so the difference between the status quo and the plan is that right now what we've ratified it as a sole executive agreement, which is just Obama going to the agreement and saying we're going to do it and then just sort of making that commitment. Our evidence says Senate or congressional or government action would be perceived as binding and sort of give the legitimacy and durability to the commitment that we've already made.
6, warming leadership.
Is it warming then leadership?
Is anyone not ready?
First off, the regulations is that Trump requires offense the plan to be aggressively used to eviscerate current regulations here on constitutional enforcement of the plan's restriction because the cost of private sector gets all 10,000 rand. Washington Post National Correspondent 2, 12 terms of the bargain most aggressive campaign against government regulation and generation administration targeting industrial bomber policy required by a campaign to learn environmental activists who fear losing regulation ban in place because Trump signed an executive order that requires agency to offset the cost of every significant new regulation, eliminating existing regulation, making them less honest or harder, replacing the total incremental cost of new regulation shall be no more than zero, and regulatory offsets post environmental regulation and risk putting Americans at risk of toxic poisoning in air, water, foods, key to bees per lane. Here's being National Policy Correspondent 131, Trump signed an executive order for independent regulation. The cost of anything more than zero, requiring two regulations be repealed or reviewed. Partners of government and apps release held raise statement containing under one federal agency issue more than 600 national regulations with a total cost exceeding $700 billion. Discovery regulation $10 the cost of change to $500 cost of every hospital save society $10 to let it cover the safe water drinking act, toxic substance control act, calls with the monitoring and prevention and household levels arsenic drinking water. He talks about site cells, Lutheran Cleaner Act, the federal and SSI public side road site administered by the EP. One of the aims to save the beast from massive dies of possible extinction, biodiversity loss, causing extinction, resource scarcity, safety conflicts, social risk, economic collapse, whereas as Institute Founding Director 16. There's no next touch that biodiversity loss by diversity loss like extreme effect upon climate change, deforestation, Amazon rainforest, elsewhere reducing amount of carbon dioxide, remove the atmosphere by cleansing our managed phenomenon to biodiversity loss, additional climate change consideration, warranty coupled biodiversity loss for climate change, the 60 for carbon creation, biodiversity loss potentially severe to state of climate change, and nuclear conflict, also biodiversity encompasses more than just the total number of species of plants population, world over living, and the tropics are right 59% there's surprising effect biodiversity loss, and science has been pulling to sway against our reason. I think that we approaching the tipping point sort of global ecosystem beyond the consequences of my catastrophic civilization planetary. Scale transition for separate substantial loss ecosystem service required to sustain human population of tropical white soil and rice economics with lots of human life could occur in a matter of decades or more quickly than most. Other great detected consequences of the climate change power of the ecologies that diversity loss of multiplied the avoided conclusion biodiversity loss constitutes the extension of own rights such as they consider alongside climate change nuclear weapons as one significant contemporary risk of human prosperity and survival. Next off is specification goals mean nothing must have action. The plan as 538 15 under national intervention to emission control the 1.52 degree target, nothing more than wishful thinking. It's just bullshit. We have the action that we need. There's no action, just promises. This huge problem like proves the grandparents principle face for you action climate change will be so there's just math or science wrong political economic system if you're unwilling to reduce consumption, restrictions, or regulation or market based or congressional budget office and the cost or reduce emission would depend on the type of policy you restrict emission based on these policies may go to the job convention or control versus the same answer to employ market based process tax or counter trade program. The first you should refer interpretation versus negative ground implementation details are crucial to ability to generate unique solution counterpoints are hard to base the type of restriction. The second is solvency details are crucial to effective assessment of political policy choices. Absent those details, you will negative presumption because it's possible to rigorously test the efficacy of plans. You should assume it does not overcome the presumption against change. Next helps the first counterplan tax relevant federal taxing agencies should issue guidance documentation indicating the intent to enact domestic climate policy and establishing the United States intended nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement as a restriction on private sector emissions of greenhouse gases in the United States and guidance documentation create policy loopholes under the radar. So Yale School JD Canada and Stanford University Political Science PhD and 10 agencies break the news guidance documentation and scope of loopholes without potentially investigating guidance documents greatly and in relation to rules of proxies 10 times more commonly enacted legislation. Agencies guide documents a lot more an issue and administrative law. Agencies guidance to circumvent the rulemaking process. Guidance documents may allow changes to avoid procedures that protect citizens from arbitrary decisions and enable citizens to effectively participate in the process. Agencies use guidance to formulate policy below the radar. Next off is T established. Established means to create a long-lasting or entirely new policy. Mirror was there no date to put someone or something in position role, etc. They'll be last for a long time to bring and create something that's meant to last for a long time. Violation of the plan is already makes an already agreed upon commitment binding. There's no new policies that change the Paris Agreement. So first that you should refer interpretation first as long as the plan explodes, allowing having out to we have the commitment to our existing standard policy. We prevent future increase. And second is ground allowing the plan that have already been implemented, creating changes in margin and loss for absence despite low ground in the initial implementation should trigger the impact on the policy voting for fairness education. Next off is the politics is that debt ceiling will pass, but it's a fight fiscal but it's a fight. China passing a real clear world 3. 21 the next battles are already growing. The debt ceiling is back. The Republicans will amend fiscal conservatives and reluctant proud to shut down the first year of Trump's presidency. You may trust that Trump's economic policy will lead economic growth ahead. I think he's the best chance of balancing the budget and bringing the debt trajectory into control. Battles for the next time debt ceiling comes around, I'll be clear that Trump's unrealistic growth expectations coupled with a plan for tax cuts or more infrastructure and defense spending will actually build in the deficit and debt scenario. The fiscal hawks and the Republican Party will not stand by silencing economic issues. Our key plot out the Washington Post 228 Trump will deploy extraordinary measures to avoid default in the deficit. Congress is not raising the cap. Trump is likely to try to pry Republicans away from their effort to shrink the deficit, but lowering the deficit. With that line, every farmer or to the matter, Congress agreed to suspend the federal debt ceiling until March 15. After that date, the Treasury Department's intent to enact emergency measures told the U.S. that it's approaching $20 trillion. Trump held the Washington Post every last year. They believe that they will eliminate the entire debt within 8 years. Trump has recently focused on an economic plan, not deficit reduction, but on job creation, economic growth. His initial pledges on spending and tax policies, just deficit reduction, not near to prayer. Trump so far is on to virtue actions. His aggressive push with deep taxes, new spending, emerging one of years which Republicans are divided to start efforts to legislate the campaign priorities. Trump will be able to handle emergency measures. Pricing NBC 35 former couple of officials, David talking to start going for investors while she's pricing and fantasy. Trump seemingly said somebody is going to have to make catalysts for residents. The debt ceiling that he contended will prevent tax reform, the debt structure, and events and anxiety, bringing investor political turmoil, control, and gridlock the markets. It's economy causes diversion and war foster Virginia Military Institute, International Studies, and Political Science Professor 1219 by starting up against patriotism with the United States, the political costs of fully performing economy with the U.S. President engaged in virtually conflicts, and psychological changes, substance, simplicity, these developments, solution to problems, large changes, center virtual disruption, leaders, and to exaggerate that to relay aggression and deal taxes for face of faulty economy leaders. Are disruption, developing systems for raising solution to properly attention problem, utilizing military force, language appeared more simplistic, disruption, more likely. These parts nearly 35% of Trump's references outside the create them as harmful percentage normal strength of previous high Americans have elected leaders historically in parallel to active suspicion of unlike himself as a candidate. Trump was to coach second lower among presidents is the concept of complexity of President Trump's number responding to even minor economic count turn and increasing use of force. Next helps the other counterplan tax. The United States Congress to establish the McChrystal Commission as an independent commission empowered to submit to Congress recommendation for private sector grants, gas emission restrictions. In the United States Congress will allow 60 days to pass legislation overriding recommendation by 2/3 majority of Congress. This does vote within a specified period. The recommendation will become law. the Commission to recommend to the Congress that the United States federal government should enact domestic climate policy establishing the United States' internationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement to restrict on private sector emission and greenhouse gas emissions. The United States accountable themselves and avoids politics. Here at Washington Post tonight. Regards to Commission on Climate Change, shook the international plane in the capital. The country's central body need a national commission for social security for more than 3 decades. Over 50 panels established by the government's system for years to come. The country now faces some urgent need for climate change consensus. The time is right for this national commission led by men and women who are impeccable credentials, are so popular with visible controversial opinions of left and right will service as well. It take seriously the recommendation of such a commission. Tens of millions will at least pay attention to populated in part by name for entertainment requests. The chair will need to fast and need fast. So I can
Okay, go to warming.
First is policy deficit. The plan text only laws for. Second is too late to solve warming sector. American enterprise and climate policy to follow. And 15 is 17 for the reduction use greenhouse gas emissions. 20 more we're saying one temperature reduction would be the yield by 21 to the effect would too small. Even most of the number comes with the EPA's on climate analysts assume try to reduce emission by 20% by 2030. Turn Europe to plan for a grand total of 0.25 degrees. A recent year deficits are almost never statistically significant overshoot evaporation, natural processes outside of our planet corruption. Never works. Massive amounts of particulates in toxic mid-fire volcanoes and our pollutants. Warming doesn't cause extinction. Heart. 50 MCC scenarios themselves are widely almost on basic types of underlying economic such as scenarios based on labor production without any reference to technological weapons adaptation. Assumption scenarios assuming negative impacts on Earth without adaptation, attributing all things back to global warming, catastrophic, huge loss in the foundation past experience. I just no idea the extent of the world. Flora and fauna aspects range from 5 million to 100 million species. Then there's no reliable data for the rate of species loss is slowly reaching the lowest levels in 500 years. The last 2 decades to 20 census time 20 reported extinction despite increased pressure on the bodies for the global warming trends. Large numbers of species extinction typically rests on the false definition of the season speculation refers either in real whenever species have proven resilient have to survive past natural climate cycles. Food shortages doesn't cause war. Illusion of love and resource. Can't see left of debates on what discussion of food war will lead. Or the evidence seems greatly more than 3 towards 100, 1800 water-related events, while shorter than cooperative side, there's no direct correlation with scarcity, and shares boundary call the major scarcity where other allocations by growing concerning climate change will lead to smoothly lighting conflict in the space expansion, where the connection is thin.
Yeah, go on. Okay. Leadership.
First, they can't solve credibility. Trump has argued for leaving trees and abandoning climate change mitigation. Even when we have had legally binding trees, the U.S. has still decided to leave them, which means conscious don't perceive the plan is permanent. Second, all causes to lack of Paris commitment. This is their evidence. Bailey and 17 made the climate agency agenda conscious focus on supporting policy and encourage R&D, especially providers and election charters in general, during the grid modernization and major quantity infrastructure bill defending existing renewable energy tax breaks only through a green bond subsidy and 2021 eliminate fossil fuel subsidies regarding the existing tax service for CCS that there are going to see plans of conditioning just 2 things had for neglected issues. Paris following is we're going to happen inevitably wrong. In 228, historically passing the baton of global leadership technology and climate for the United States to try and slash and coal use and ban heavily clean air too is clearly going to be the biggest use of permanent highway jobs in the coming years. China's coal consumption from 2030 gets like the year's basic products of the world to continue. In 2017, China is making a global leader in climate action. Meanwhile, the rest of the world redoubles commitment to ramp up clean energy, ratcheting up climate carbon. Boost are required by the Paris climate commitments. $50 trillion of work commitment to the coming decades. Afford no nuclear terror, Sharmer. 14 terrorism is a minor with nuclear arms. He's going to supply terrorists with nuclear weapons because they never control represents use a weapon in theory. Terrorists will have a loose nuke weapon. The U.S. has already detailed plan to deal with terrorism. Might also trade physical material to build their own bomb scenarios and like there are significant obstacles to engage material and even build our arsenals building a bomb and then delivering every country is a profound impact. Make sure our terrorist group requires nuclear arms. They didn't even read enough of the disease card to be able to get an impact. There's no unique concern to relate to trade. Dress our 16 globalization creates power for Russian governments have to close out their economy into independence. Can also tend to conflicts with otherwise be likely to break down nuclear power transition. China's recent rights to great power sets and elevate tensions relating to anything. A person one of the South American economic relations so he says hamp down great power policies 2008 to go through trade goals are smaller than they were pre-crisis. There's also some reasons possible why independence might sell and possibilities to do to make sure the need for trade goods.
The first mark is the need for trade goods.
Alright, ready?
Mm-hmm.
The first card of your regulatory offsets DA says that Trump is engaged in the most aggressive anti-regulatory campaign in history. If that's true, why wouldn't he just roll back those biodiversity regs inevitably?
Because there are checks like things
What
like
checks?
Things like the courts, things like public pressure, things.
Wait,
like
so why wouldn't the
pressure,
courts
things
check
like,
that regulatory offset?
Hmm?
Why wouldn't the courts check the offset results from the plan?
Because the current executive order is the law of the land. The plan does.
No,
and
the courts
plan
can still
triggers
roll
that.
back. Hold on, why did the courts stop rollback of regulatory regulations now, but not after the executive order? The courts can say that executive orders are not constitutional.
Yeah, but they haven't done that for this particular executive order. For the quick fiat action of the plan, it needs to trigger this executive order before the court can roll back. The court has the time to roll back other like rollback arguments and like other checks
Totally
like
get
sort
that.
of
Okay.
other
Also,
international laws.
I gotta move on. I gotta move on. The politics GA, your first card says that people are scared of the debt ceiling and understand its economic ramifications. But you highlight the part where it's like this will happen the next time the debt ceiling comes around, which is like the next debt ceiling cycle, not this one. What is your uniqueness argument?
I don't know if that's true. Well,
It
a couple
is.
uniqueness arguments. One is that there are fiscal concern or that there are debt hawks that are sort of circulating and are skeptical of Trump's economic policy. The plan sort of blows that up and makes Trump look not credible.
Well, your evidence says Trump's economic policy is like tax changes and infrastructure.
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
the
it's
plan
based
exactly?
on economic stimulus and trying to bring bring jobs back as opposed to deficit reduction. That shift for debt hawks and fiscal conservatives to stop seeing as that stimulus being.
Why is the
credible means
plan
they'll
seen
shift
as
to debt.
reversing Trump's stimulus plan?
Because one of Trump's biggest things, and we're going to bring jobs back, is we're going to stop these sort of climate change regulations. We're going to pull out of the Paris Agreement. Codifying that and agreeing that is very clearly a reversal of what
Okay,
Trump has promised.
if that's the case, why has the debt ceiling been raised literally every other time it's been debated? If debt hawks are a thing?
Because a couple of reasons. One is that Democrats were in power in those other times, which means they had more unity to be able to do that.
There was
Second, we didn't have
divided
Trump,
government
right?
that's just not true. There were Republican Congress and Republican House and Senate.
Right.
During the later years of the Obama
We
presidency,
got
the
lucky
debt
those
ceiling
times
didn't
we
get
didn't
raised.
have the scenario where Trump has been pushing economic stimulus and these debt hawks are skeptical of it.
Okay, the counter plan, I assume it's a non-binding regulation. Does it have any force of law? The first counter plan?
Not legally, but we will argue that is de facto binding.
What does it mean to be de facto binding?
It means other countries and private companies will perceive it as binding.
Why?
That's just how guidance documentation,
That's not an answer. Why do they perceive it as binding if it's not?
Because the regulatory agencies will say that this is what we are doing now.
This is what we are doing. Why does that mean it's binding?
The way that when guidance documents are implemented, it means that companies and countries don't necessarily know because they're vaguely worded if they're actually binding or not, which means they better on and just follow it.
Vaguely worded. Got it. How can you win your recommendation counterplan if you have a politics link?
Because it avoids the politics thing.
How?
It creates bipartisan support.
How? If there are debt hawks who are super annoyed at Trump for economic stimulus changes, why does the commission make them change their opinion on that?
Sure, so it's not a question of whether or not they change their mind, it's a question of whether or not they establish an independent commission. That means that they don't have to worry about fighting the debt ceiling.
You just spectacularly avoided my entire question. That's okay.
Yeah, I agree with everything.
Yeah, that's fine.
because it tests the United States' willingness to honor its commitments with the most salient issue of the year. That's the Bailey evidence. The all causes don't overwhelm it. Their Bailey evidence is their Bailey evidence list that they read is not just proposing things that we should do for warming policies. The plan could result in those, but current commitments are sufficient. Paris failure is not inevitable. The ROM evidence isn't quantified, or Paris is not going to inevitably solve it. And the ROM evidence is not quantified. It just says that the baton has been passed to China, but our Marino evidence says that the U.S. leaving causes, or failing to comply causes the lowest common denominator and fails to create ambitions, momentum. Yes, nuclear terrorism, their internally evidence is assume a loss of cooperation, which means that it bypasses all things like resolving things like which makes it easier to steal and also causes escalation to be more likely. Finishing disease, we read sufficient amount of this impact. They shouldn't get new defense to it because we read all the parts that burnout isn't sufficient to solve, which means it causes extinction. Mariam 16, even a system can be destabilized, long-range connected sick food war service, work and 100 passengers an outbreak could prove to be unstoppable. Uniqueness for trade dresser takes out their impact but doesn't take out ours because history proves that trade alignment is critical to solve war, and that empirically it's been able to do that, but Dressler says institutions are able to check for economic decline. Cyber impact causes extinction, escalates because multiple flashpoints exist right now, which create an escalation spiral that's farly. Spec. Counter-interpretation, we only have to specify up to the resolution solved for offense. Any other interpret is infinitely aggressive. Their focus trades off with discussions of merits of reducing missions due to long plan text specifying each component of the right. Give no restrictions or limits that prohibit action. We don't have to specify the terms and conditions. Charlie Brown. 12. The definition of restrictions down to the terms and conditions. Black laws define restrictions full limitation imposed by prohibit for action. Their goals evidence means that their goals mean nothing. Evidence about Paris not being binding, which means the plan resolves the criticism there that no ground loss. They still get dissets based on likely effects of the plan based on signaling legality. Specking is forced to make competitive, which causes all have offense or stability in air. If they don't have a right to the ground, they lose in theory. Proliferation kills substance, which is critical at the NDT because it's our last opportunity to discuss the presumption argument. All of our internal links are based off of legal signaling, which means this isn't responsive. T. Establish. We need the plan establishes a domestic climate policy. Current Paris obligations have no effect on U.S. domestic law. Nebraska 16 under Paris obligations do not have an effect on U.S. laws. Although Paris legally binding, the national mission progression goals have political rather than legal force. Paris does not impose legally binding national targets. Counter-interpretation only. Prefer interpretation limits the negative exposed the topic to substantially different actions. Prefer substantially different answers. They also mix burdens. The burden for the act becomes proving that all non-codified commitments Obama's made to make the act topical. This should be a question of absolvency. You shouldn't punish us for having good uniqueness arguments. Now reasonability that overrides a limited topic or the ground they lose. Cross-apply that from the other T violation. Voluntary counterplan. The voluntary counterplan doesn't make sense for the act because the status quo is already guidance by things like the EPA, but it's the failure of the Trump administration to implement Paris that is crushing the signal. Permutation do both. Failure to include binding economy-wide restrictions on the emissions makes the counterplan worthless for compliance with Paris NDT Peterson 16 law to build national government include domestic mandates. Paris can bring mandatory obligation. The U.S. ratified Paris without enforceable or climate change could also trigger mandatory duty to meet Paris emissions. National goal can build willpower. Vehicle limits must be used. Emissions likely succeed without willpower. Paris can focus on willpower is less than formal. This requires change. Now, climate commitments are very carefully parsed, which means that the signal of the counterplan is not perceived as de facto binding by the international community. Rebuttal 15 could the world have a single world. The next touch should be the formality, which something would have gone very long, longer step on that they approved about a world issue. The difference between the countries been legally obliged to have countries rather than just having tried or shall rather than what there was a crisis. The whole community trying there the rich countries should lead to take the lead of developing countries. This is the video providing every part of the text time from that closely follows negotiations type of the we will refer to, and many times the counterplan sends an incoherent signal. It doesn't lead to plan anything. The United States non-observance and EP ruling requirements is widespread misuse of such documents to have vicarious great cost effective members are likely to be confused or misled about the regional legal quality. The effective persons are unaware of the agency intends to get now legislative issues by the effect on uncertainty bringing away our efforts trying to puzzle out how far they are bound. Conditionality is bad, encourages running down negative strategies, which is trade debt logical obviously to see strategy, but that team damage is already done. The commission's counterplan. Permutation, do the plan through the process of the counterplan. Permutation, do the counterplan. Counterplans must compete off of the mandates of the plan, not likely outcome. Now certainty is key. You can cross-apply that from the Anthony evidence from the other counterplan. Now second is that the plan is key to confirm and solidify private sector investment and signal that's to Paris. That was also from the other page. Delays bad at crushes solvency in a few years makes 2 years unachievable. That's Sanderson. Now counterplans delayed by years. Campbell 2 commissions mandates include termination taking more than 3 years. The Paris notice specified data consummated which is 39 years after its report to Congress. The next years are key. King is 16. The Paris student come into effect in 20 make the Supreme Court global climate policy during the next 2 years. Parties will negotiate on more detailed questions related to implementation upon common negotiation shape future climate policy towards a positive signal of increasing ambitions. It doesn't solve the link to politics. Cross-ex proves that hawkish, ideologically opposed people to climate change won't accept the plan, which means they still backlash commissions. Also link Campbell to the Roosevelt was the first team of the commission that can be quickly involved in controversy. Congress over he says legislative leaders all grounds of Roosevelt use commission shift to press preemption policy areas that fell within the legislative jurisdiction. The act of the commission that have delivered critics to Congress defacing ad hoc commissions by excessive use. Martin, excessive use. The Hewitt article. I went back to the article. One is that it says the commission would be populated by Republicans, which means they'd say no. 2, it says that it would also be populated by controversial opinions. Again, say no. 3rd is that the only line that says that there would be adoption of the plan is saying the guy who wrote the article said, I would adopt the plan after the commission, the politics dissat, healthcare fails, feeling lead pounds, the dissat, pet peace, and James 324 Thompson, stuck with the humiliating defeat on his first major legislative test in the video body and calls into question when, whether he can move his debt, including tax reform and infrastructure, healthcare, also immigrants, Trump's stimulated the reputation of Congress to Trump and for everything things will be. I don't see how you recover the president's committed to everything big things happen, loss of quality empty. Trump limits the budget of COG purchase over Trump's generation no recent, as lost in progress on the key agenda item marked that agenda item no debt ceiling fight, has number 321 debt ceiling fact covered link 20 12 and 2013 ratio real easier nation fine, where Trump and around link labels right motion stress that honor the debt is critical for hopefully relevant to prompted, showing this virtue of the Trump's substance short and ratchet can the Trump second continue such as certain places that can should I enough time for policymakers to erase the ceiling, the impacts over Bloom Baker 13 debt defaults the ceiling, nothing like will happen in the bouncy, delay making credit payments will carry costs, no one's going to sell the bonds at 20% because the government was a few days late. Tax reform is what they pivoted to, which means that Trump's VC will be spent on that. Now refine the U.S. commitment to Paris' key to the economy back in 1227. Trump's Paris double down on the regulation. Paris will stimulate the investment in clean energy and mark. U.S. is welcome to the transition to clean energy is one of the largest market opportunities of all time. Key idea of reverse technology for its consequence and refines its structure to renewable growth into a direct work of the year radius by 24 million jobs. The nation keeps commitments under Paris. The Paris will boost a competitiveness, intrinsicness, a logical policymaker to develop the plan and avoid the debt ceiling, the foster evidence is bad. It tries to code things like personality, which are impossible in their defense. Takes out the dissent, now abandoning regulatory offsets. The plan is not a regulation compliance with the IPCs is happening now, which means that best further regulations would occur years from now, which means that the Trump administration would no longer be here and we wouldn't know what the 2 for 1 XO would do. Now the Trump's rule that can affect environmental policy, including 17 the 2 carbon regulation review and South Korea things will work the order itself because out of the rules Supreme Court called it non-influential Trump's order does not simply require agencies to ask the active official rules the White House can affect any of those rules to be revealed, but can't over the authority to grant to an agency laws of the EPA takes this given period possible with regulation for required by the states and environmental groups would challenge that massive environmental rollback is inevitable. The restitution between Trump's carrying out the more expressive rollback environmental rules he's getting just started. Trump has made it easier reminders to double resort to the CFU to voice your effects to the EPA. Trump's not going to this campaign rhetoric marking campaign rhetoric states solving grounds rights and other 5 con veterans will flipping church and federal regulatory and 40 sacrifices and environmental protection dispute or seeking that just limits come from websites and the promises that aren't found for them to believe in how to fight the government's ability to protect and invasive endangered species via the spending power marked that spending power warming destroys biodiversity. OECD 16 climate change accounts for biodiversity loss almost 40% of species between 2030 and 2050 biodiversity loss and the severe implications for economic systems, human well-being and security. Failure to lead on Paris alienates allied hope that's vital to check Russian aggression to Iran in 1220. Trump keeps the power of the chemical substance of acting in sensitive countries to as sparkles have given way to reducing emissions and nuclear photo disasters to the defeats diplomatic and fall precipitously get assessed as the U.S. would capital would according to European allies reverse course from British partners and might make them less willing to cooperate in Washington political justice against Russian aggression that escalates forward 15 tensions and with Russia could blow up into an all-out compromising next attempt or opinion would invade Nato would after having the last would be too breaking negative would make collective decisions difficulty. Russia could be speaking to the red escalation may be so prevent establishment risk of national resolution and conflict in the alliance would be prepared to repel aggression. The offsets dissent does not take out the act because it's based off of legal signaling and all of the compliance is being market driven right now, which means very little EPA oversight is necessary.
We'll take just really quick.
Is what I got.
Okay, you ready? So the Russia add-on, the internal link is about unifying European allies. Why isn't Brexit done?
It's not about unifying European allies, it's about U.S. cooperation with individual allies who would backlash the U.S.'s withdrawal or failure to implement.
Why would any European ally cooperate with Trump over Russia, given all of the issues that are going on between like Trump pandering to Russia?
Well,
like,
so there are a lot of European allies who have some populist politicians. Trump is a populist politician. I think they'd see that it's up in the air about what's going on with Russia and how strong the alliances are. However, we have actual tangible defense commitments to European
Sure,
allies,
what are
which would
those?
overwhelm the sort of like hyperbolized media kind of discussion
Okay,
with Russia.
fair enough. Why is a climate policy policy necessary for Trump to talk to European allies about NATO, especially
Our
in a world?
Severum evidence actually connects the two issues and says that if Trump backlashed on that commitment, it would test the honorable commitments that the U.S. has to individual EU allies and the strength of those defense
But
commitments.
why? So, like, if there are populist you have said there are populist leaders. Why do those populist leaders care about
because
climate
populist
policy?
leaders are still concerned about how honorable defense commitments are. The 1AC evidence, interlink evidence also establishes that Paris is a critical test because it's the issue of like the last 5
But
years
why do
that
those
tests
populist
whether
so, like,
politicians honor their commitments.
I get why
what
populist
other,
leaders care about defense. Why do
What
populist
other
leaders?
litmus test do you think there is for testing honorable
I
commitments?
don't know,
in the
like
last 5
having
years?
NATO troops in the region, like
Yep.
things like that. Okay. The delay solvency deficit on the commission's counterplan was the threshold for delay equals no solvency.
Campbell evidence says commissions generally take more than 3 years. The Kangas evidence actually lines up really well with that and says that if we don't have momentum during the next 3 years, then that would result in a rationing down of ambitions, a failure to meet Paris. Sanderson evidence from 17 from the 1AC also substantiates that and says that the emissions pathway would become so insurmountable within the next few years that would prevent the collapse of total ability to solve warming because future tech would not be able to resolve that. It
Okay.
just wouldn't have capacity.
Sure. The Petty Price and Jacobs evidence just talks about how the public perceives Trump as like a failure on these healthcare bills. Where does it talk about political capital and his ability to convince fiscal hawks about his economic strategy?
So if that wasn't a major loss and blowback to the Trump administration, I really don't know what is.
Healthcare
Petty Price
repeal
and
was a
Jacobs
sen-
evidence says that it's a body blow to call into question whether he can move his agenda, including tax reform and
I don't know
infrastructure.
if that like
Healthcare
answers the
reform was a
question.
central goal of fiscal hawks. It was their entire legislative
I
strategy.
don't think
And
it
also
would,
like the Petty Price
because
and
there's,
Jacobs
like,
evidence like
refinement.
connects it to like the rest of his agenda.
The last few weeks have been a new core in the House, dude. Like,
Okay, sure enough.
guidance documents counterplan, the commission's counterplan, the warming advantage, the leadership advantage.
Do that again.
EPA guidance documents counterplan, commission's counterplan, warming, and then leadership. Is anyone not ready? Guidance documents counterplan not going for. We'll consider permutation is just a competitional answer conditionality. First, the conditionality is good. One is offense. A is education promotes a wide range of discussion and research was key to getting broad and comprehensive understanding of the topic alternatives. Make debate worse. And B is fairness is key to negative flexibility, giving us only one advocacy, restricting us with the bad side, ensuring we can't win because the app will always be more important than negatives. This is additionally true when they read all new impacts to the leadership advantage. C is counterinterpretation. The next you get two. Conditional advocacy solves all their screw death claims because it just allows more advocates in order to be able to test new and for our new advantages and new impact level. Second is defense. A is permanent check. They can make numerous conditional arguments across the flow in a fraction of the time. B is skews inevitable. There will always be differences in speed and fairness guaranteed some skew. U can cross by reasonability from the T standards. We or reasonably meet their interpretation, which is only reason we only extend one into the two in our wish is a reason why you should refer. Now the commission's counterplan first is the overview. Counterplan solves the gap. The McChrystal Commission is key to generate broad bipartisan support with the bill by focusing on the impact of climate change and avoiding discussion of the anthropogenic nature of climate only. An independent commission can avoid losing political capital because of the cover of the commission and will pass and disagree capital and peers for Mayor University of Wisconsin Madison political science resident 7. Conventional wisdom was that legislative facing a reason of its measure was the solution was to separate the process into two parts, breaking up the process into two separate discussions, creating substantial political governance, insinuating the effectiveness for the consequence of a local base closing, ensuring that no review legislator was directly connected to a specific vote to close the base review legislator corresponds to the binding on director of the recommended closure was key. Now their first argument to you can agree with them because both the permutations fail. The one is that they sever the entirety of the plan. The counterplan is different from any action of the plan. It doesn't do any part of the counterplan, or that doesn't do any part of the counterplan. It's only a recommendation which changes the implementation. B is that it's a voting issue because they sever the stable, they sever out of the immediacy the one they sever immediacy inserted on one AC, which makes impossible to get stable counterplan and ground disheadlings. Now the next argument is they also sever any sort of normal mean guards because just doing the plan through the counterplan is obviously not normal means because normal means includes Congress, not something like the commission, which is the only worse that they sever that, and that is uniquely offensive because it prevents any sort of process debates. So we can have about the implementation of the plan now and also any sort of permutation would still link to the net benefit because it still cover any sort of permutation of both the app and the implementation of the counterplan still links back to things like politics because it still causes Trump to get involved, which means he loses political capital. Although they say certainty is given there is always certainty. The one AC evidence indicates that it was inevitably happen. It's just a question of whether or not that it gets recommended, which they, with the 60-day mandate that it is debated or implemented in law, and Congress indicates that this uncertainty happens because they have to insert 2/3 majority in order to be able to overwhelm, which is key to be able to solve this because they have to win that overwhelming majority would happen. And there's also a 60-day limit to insurance passage key to transport key to priorities in plan implementation of that politicization. North Center for Immigration Studies, Senior Fellow 10. Differences are making those institutions that are different. Text indicates commission shall submit to Congress the methodologies proposed to be used to determine the need for immigrant working on any reform orders. Congress shall have 90 days to enact a resolution disapproving the absence of such action. The methodologies and approving the absence of such action. The numeric levels are stand approved and be implemented over the start of the next fiscal year. The commission decides only all year long based on you make recommendations to give Congress all of 90 days to react to recommendations. Looks very much like the de facto plan to take with those decisions when Congress allows. The commission did something so drastic Congress would force the act of their next recommendation is the plan. Because the right sector counterplan shall solve because it still implements the entirety of the affirmative, which means there's no risk that the entirety of the affirmative through the recommendation unless it's a one, which means it's still able to resolve any sort of the private sector arguments. Now the next arguments are the delay. You can group these arguments. One is that there's only 60 days delay, but there's no reason why 60 days between now and the counterplan are key to solve the advantage, which means the politics impacts outweigh. Second is that the steps to approve their impacts are happening now, which means there's no time frame. And three is that counterplan solves because the depolitization of the process is key to streamline implementation and accompanying regulation, which means it resolves delay and probably solves the affirmative better. Now the next argument is that the links to politics. This is the next argument is that links to politics. It doesn't link to politics. One, Congress has political incentive not to reject. Mayor says the recommendations wouldn't be tied to individual senators, so they wouldn't have to voice an opinion on it. Second is the commissioner provides political cover. The one is the evidence that makes it seem like an objective to your recommendation, which depoliticizes the process. Three is it doesn't link until after the 60-day period happens after the politics scenario. And four is it doesn't link to Trump because Congress people only blame the commission, but Trump remains insulated. Now that answers to AC number 8. Now there to AC number 9 too, where the Republicans say no argument is you can group all these arguments because this evidence just indicates that the commission would have to be bipartisan. You can link to the one and see evidence that we've read, which indicates that the commission would inevitably be filled with people from both sides of the aisle, which we would argue that fiating that would be able to bring significant political comfort in order to be able to solve that's no different from the fiat of the app. Now the fiat also reason why fiat is able to resolve any of those issues. Now the warming advantage first is that you can extend one and see number one, that says evidence is too late to solve warming. This evidence is more cooperative recent. There's a points to agreements that propose limitations to ensure that it isn't enough climate change that can happen in time for virtual or warming in China, Europe, Japan, and the US all lower their emissions by upwards of 20% and still wouldn't be close to silent, which proves that either cooperation is solving the impact now as China's leadership is inevitable. There's no reason why the US leadership is key. Their evidence also doesn't take into account, even the 2EC sounds good, there's still evidence doesn't take into account the consensus of models, which is what the Zyker evidence is indicative of, which is why you should prefer. Now you can also extend 2EC number 2EC, or 1 and C number 2, which indicates warming doesn't cause extinction. Our hard evidence is direct and to their evidence. IPCC scenarios that they base their impacts on don't include discussions of adaptation or mitigation strategies that exist successful and only continue to evolve. Species loss is owing to its level of in the past 500 years. Those prove that current warming is attributed to any things like biodiversity loss. There's a reason they just say that we can't adapt. Their evidence cites things like IPCC models, which don't include assuming rapid innovations and things like adaptation, which is why these prefer evidence. Also, warming doesn't cause extinction. Most recent data proves that even 4-degree warming wouldn't be catastrophic. As Manhattan Institute Energy Senior Policy Senior Fellow in 3/21/17. Scientists have produced a range of estimates in response to a variety of complicated questions, broad base level efforts to synthesize the best research in physical social sciences to least offer the parameters to which assess the nature of the climate threat be estimated degrees centigrade 4 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. Most of the rise at sea level to result in not from glaciers from the thermal expansion motion waters becomes or the impact to be similar to the human civilizations imposed on the natural world already been done. That's something that modern society seems intolerable or human progress. A rise in temperature of 3.8 degrees Celsius would cause 3.9% of the GDP days. You're effectively reducing GDP 400 trillion. Nowhere is catch asteroid to be found. The societal collapse and counter opposite innovation isn't simply irreconcilable with the outlook that science and economics offer. Now, the last argument I'm going to send is the one, and see number 3 argument. There's no risk of resource source. Yes, obviously there's scenarios not resource source, but still indicates that there are underlying security and or conflict resolution that will be able to resolve any of the impacts associated with warming. This evidence is also really good because it cites an empirical study, which is cites things like empirical validity. There's reason why these conflicts would never be able to escalate. It also answers arguments any of their security claims out. There's also warming doesn't cause more local changes in food prices. They're dealing for distinct and their evidence is all speculative. The best choice area foundation for strategic resourcing and found 11. If there was any significant link between warfare and warming, the number of conflicts should have been rising. It's not quite the contrary. The total number of wars has diminished. The existence of these data points should contribute to the extreme caution about hypothetical equation according to which warmer would be warmer would the drug determined conclusions to be a short experts as cause outlet come to a breaking point while food prices being paid. You're rolling the arrow of discontent. The offers of there no incentive for further contention of the necessary growth of environmentally induced confidence itself is fundamentally flawed. Now, the only war that they extend to the 2AC is things like migration conflict is happening, which is this is all we have to win in order to be able to prove the conflict. There's no conflict with things like warming. There's no widespread conflict, migration, disruption, flows will happen solely over time. Cass Manhattan, and 17, yeah. Second cognitive fault line emerges over interpretation of climate changes, slow motion onset, the by shipping of monsoon patterns displace so many. Remember, growing wealth and infrastructure in the developing world will ensure the level of resilience far greater than those of today's displacement will not happen all at once. Spread over decades, century disruption, little difference from these status quo, but have that hard together on the nation of unprecedented oxygen regardless of climate change. Almost all every component of the global economy's capital base, remember, is city centers will promise will be depreciated and will need to be replaced by new investment over the next 100 years because of vigorously and infrastructure will be deteriorate, and because the alternatives will be worth and solid adaptation may represent long-term during non-society's resource of that does not mean it will be noticeably alter the trajectory of human civilization. Now, the leadership advantage you can extend 1 and C number 1 to plan would not be perceived as genuine because the U.S. has left treaties and things like the past, and Trump has been talking about tearing down the CPP. All of these are reasons why he would never be seen as credible if he does something, even if he makes private barriers, especially because the countries don't perceive fiat as durable, which means there's only a risk that countries think that we're not actually going to follow through. This is exacerbated by the status quo. The plan won't stop leadership. Timing the plan in the context of the Kramer strategy to kill Paris from within will undercut the signal of the plan and won't be perceived as genuine, which turns both advantages. Shockman and Climate News 3/21/17. A letter being circulated on Capitol Hill by a Cree congressional ally of Trump and the possible leadership argues that the United States should sign the Paris Climate Agreement, but on historically different terms. Kramer said the United States should not play the recognize the global agreement, which should walk back and switch to cut greenhouse gas emissions, something less ambitious that would mean abandoning key promises while attempting to make change and influence over climate action. The president should come up with a new pledge B should showcase the energy security, consumer, and emissions benefits produced by the rich scale revolution. The policy strongly favors fossil fuels and pledges to reduce or revive the U.S. coal industry, projection while ministries and plan to be the current pledges. We should use our power to veto any project team wins while harmful to the global security, energy security efforts, part of the eradication of objectives in the developing world. The U.S. should use its seat of the Paris stable to defend and promote our commercial interests, including manufacturing fossil standards. And there's now the I'm also going to extend 1 and C. I'm also going to send the terror defense first, so there's no risk of nuclear terrorism. This is Mueller and Stewart and 12. An extrapolation of delusionary proportions they developed in the observation that terrorists might be able to contribute nuclear bomb. Officials may use Al-Qaeda confusion in the content of years of such as they never had no time and dedication. Money said uranium seizing operations of a facility to fabricate a bomb. If the screens in the American case has been so unable to bring conventional bombs under the close to planning nuclear weapons or biological, radiological, or chemical, and seeing one of the card there. They also don't have a scenario for who gets nuclear weapons, which should be highly skeptical. There comes down along to 1AR extrapolation on this. Now the disease. Now they you can extend so. Okay, and you can extend the drugs evidence on the trade defense. As evidence is phenomenal, wasn't taken on any impact, and they will not answer the internal links. Our evidence indicates the trade is on the decline in status quo, but that is resilient because there are other international multilateral factors that are able to check any sort of conflict from happening in the first place. It doesn't take out things like econ because it changes the financial institution. Our evidence indicates that global trade is on the decline now, and the countries expect that you can also, also part of the other two things. Okay, just a second, bro.
So like, let's establish what it does.
Sure.
There are inevitably some recommendations that the McChrystal Commission forwards. If Congress doesn't vote on them, those become law. If Congress does vote on them, those become law. There's for sure a restriction on emissions after the counterplan. Is that correct?
No. So
What, I'm sorry, your counterplan text says
Yeah.
if Congress does not vote, these recommendations will become law. The Commission should recommend to Congress. Congress will allow 60
Right.
days.
Sure, the 2NC and the 1NC solvency evidence, or actually just the 2NC solvency evidence, indicate that it would have to take a 2/3 majority to overturn the congressional recommendation, which proves that like is like all the certainty arguments I made.
Gotcha. So there is a possibility that they could overturn it. Okay.
Yeah, if there was a 2/3 majority.
Okay. Your response to, like, one of your responses to the permutation was that the recommendations would not be the plan. You later said on the flow that you implement the plan. Do you have causal evidence about what kind of recommendations the McChrystal Commission would forward?
Okay, so sure, the argument on the permutation was not that it wouldn't be the plan. They obviously recommend the plan as per the counterplan
They
text. It's just a
definitively
question of-
recommend the plan.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's just a question of whether or not that like the delay mechanism of the plan, the certainty of the counterplan, all of these are like
Gotcha. But you will
competition
defend that
arguments
they
for the counterplan.
you will defend that the McChrystal Commission in their recommendations specifies that we should, implement our INDCs as binding.
Right, yeah.
Okay,
as per the
gotcha. Cool,
counterplan
that's
text,
all I
it's
need.
the same as
The piece of warming defense that you extend from the warming, like, too late to solve card is from the AEI. They receive funding from climate deniers. The CAS evidence that you read is from the Manhattan Institute. They receive funding from the Koch brothers. What incentive do we have to believe these claims when they're funded by climate
Sure,
deniers?
so I think for the Zeiger evidence, even if like people obviously are funded by both groups, like people over exaggerate the impacts of climate change because they're funded by like renewables and environmentalists. I think that this evidence, however, Zeiger evidence cites a consensus of studies that talks about specifically
What studies
like,
does
the
it cite?
It talks specifically about the EPA and the IPCC.
Just the EPA and the IPCC.
Yeah.
Cool.
As
Okay.
that, and then the other evidence cites like the most recent data, which is probably why it should be preferred.
Okay, that
because
sounds
it's from,
good.
3 days ago.
The Dresner evidence. So why can institutions check trade, but not the economy? Like, what is distinct about an economic decline that prevents institutions from checking it?
Right. So the Dresner evidence is in the context specifically of like trade is going down now, but
But,
that
like,
isn't that big of a deal.
What are the
because
measures that
countries have,
institutions
like,
use to check
insulated
trade?
themselves.
What are the measures that institutions use to check trade?
Like just like being more like I don't know, like having different bilateral agreements that mean
Bilateral
that they don't
agreements
have to
for
rely
what?
on,
Like for
giant
trade
agreements
flows?
anymore.
For trade flows that generate revenue that prevent decline?
It's
Um,
yeah, it's not what
Gotcha.
that sense.
So back to the counterplan. The counterplan gives these like Congress an ultimatum basically that says it'll become law. Why doesn't that increase the incentive for Congress to fight about the counterplan and like object to it really stringently? If they're like basically like there will be climate measures if you don't fight it right now.
So even if they do, that doesn't necessarily matter because it's still not tied to Trump. It would be tied to the commission. So that's kind of a weird. Do you want me to leave this up here? Or did you?
I'm not gonna go there.
Oh yeah, I forget. Okay. Good.
Okay, so it's gonna be where Gabe left off on the leadership advantage, the regulations to set, and the politics to set.
Leadership.
Regs, politics. You know the difference by now, Hannah, between the two? Because some people don't.
Just give me 1 sec. Sorry.
Leadership advantage, regs, debt.
They were not ready.
Diseases don't cause extinction, appear to cause a lecture at Chicago Law School, and 5 members savings to survive every disease, and the focus on extinction now become close to destroying the entire human race. There's no danger that ideas will destroy the entire human race. No reason is improving medical science, even more discoveries, smallpox, vaccines, smallpox, and not wipe out the entire human race, and super diseases can't happen by virulence, trace all transmissibility or it. And 5, it's going to spread to keep the host on, the host can't keep the whole dying ball, doesn't spread because it's slowly close to right now. The could be there's no chance of bug to spread the transmissibility, decrease the virulence, as you can see, you stick to transmit disease, it doesn't, it dies with, the cyber impact. There's no impact on arena, lecture, and school, and society, social and political Science of the University of Glasgow, Mars, PhD candidate, University of Chicago, and 12 trucks followed by the flame virus, generating substantial bugs, destruction, and pain attacks, not dangerous types of have been made with viruses, can be physically integrating the result of the death of lasting damage to the bodies, cyber attacks worldwide, been mined the actual magnitude of past impact is now probable perception of 120 for active rivals engaged in cyber conflicts. Cyber attacks are rare when they do occur. States are conscious. Other use of force principle deters mutual shared destruction applies to aggressive face of the full-back A. Cyber warfare can be companies, technology operators, gathering houses, promote the adoption of numbers of murder trained by the cyberspace order to cyber attacks and unfound cyber warfare requires substantial infrastructure money and ground operations against cyber attacks on runs individual or trivial person. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Okay, breaks his hat. Where's that? Not going for it, I'm going to concede that the app is not a regulation that Trump's makes the environmental rollback. In fact, now we should hold the line on what the 2AC explicitly said. They have explicitly said that the app is not a regulation. They just result in the status quo. I mean, the NDT in order to have some sort of Paris agreement. That cannot happen if Trump rolls back environment. That cannot happen if Trump rolls back environmental regulations. That's for their uniqueness. Evidence is per the 2-4 strategy. They codify Paris as some sort of new restriction. They codify Paris as some sort of new restriction. It triggers the 2-for-1 scenario, which means that Trump will roll back other regulations. Which means we can't our NDC because it will just offset the 22% increase in Paris and the emissions from things like the electricity sector. They'll offset that with increases in coal mining exports and coal. This is the perception argument that we're going for on the leadership. Advantage as well, the warming advantage. Other countries will just perceive it as hollow commitments, even if we codify the entirety of Paris. They'll just perceive Trump as not being credible on this mission. We'll see the rollback of other things. They can't access any other case scenarios. It magnifies all of the solvency impacts game that you can cross by the presumption standard from the specification page. It's not specification, the exact regulation or the exact strategy in order to include regulation and include sort of codification as part of the law of the land, which means you should err negative on this question. Trump gets to choose what sort of regulations and what sort of fines and punishments comes with that codification of the Paris Agreement, because the plan text did not do that. They get this, they get these textual fiat of the plan. They want the spirit of the law. Trump will still be a demagogue who disavows climate change. They'll still say it's a terrible economic transition, which means they can't get any of the case. Now the Russia add-on, it's silly. Either populist leaders in Europe don't perceive climate as an issue, which means that's national security commitment solved, or it means that inevitable pandering to Russia will inevitably trigger the impact. There's no Russia or Meekins. 17 Russian powered bill pending poses societal economic problems. The country's facing population economic weakness and our absence military spending, global aspiration, domestic control, overlook the regime. Also restrictions ability to venture around the projectile tank force ones on Russia's economies weak, the risk of collapse, energy price, and Russian court wiping out many other economic gains that all have been preventing ties to second. Russia is facing demographic crisis. Russia is not having enough children in the national amount 6 months such for lower than North Korea. Russia's population expected to shrink by 60% in 2015, leading to 20%. With reduction in labor forces, 3 Russia can no longer afford to buy up such a region. Russia's economies have the regionalized to continue transfers. Our now region can grow populous backlash and restrict cost possibility. Propose efforts in place for Russia to reduce military spending. The state of Russia's economy largely depends on military spending. Russia's projected to spend like $31 billion on military. That's in France. Its card is marked in France. I'll go to the politics and start off Tuesday when they say it's a healthcare fair. Healthcare is not an economic issue. It was a regulatory issue, which means it doesn't apply to our specific links. It's uniqueness for us, but not for them. Goldstein, 3.5 the annual regulating the development is was that the sphere of the exceptional legislative rights not affect any showdown until the exercise was called the difficult Republican must support for the age. States chose some parts being disputes again how they were under Obama and Charles has been this minimal press. Presidents that definitely raised against $1 trillion to $2 trillion tiny the most area. $4 for formula is roughly $90 billion to spend before you get Trump. Trump's probably won't achieve the goal and then doesn't This doesn't answer the specific link to the plan. There's inevitable, our uniqueness evidence says it's inevitably going to be able to pass the tax reform infrastructure because he can pander to the fiscal conservatives and have a good economic strategy, but the plan throws that in his face and shows fiscal conservatives that he doesn't have a good plan, which means that they will fight and go for deficit reduction, which means that one, he won't be able to pass things like infrastructure and tax reform, which means he'll lash out and trigger our impact, and second means that the debt ceiling won't get raised off to AC2. They say there's no debt ceiling fight. This is our evidence. It doesn't assume the link of economic fights that kills Trump's ability to push for stimulus as opposed to debt reduction. That's a polite evidence. It means that debt hawks will take over and require absolute deficit reduction, which kills Trump's economic strategy. Off to C3, they say the debt ceiling impact is overblown. This is not the impact we're going for. We're going for a Trump lash out because he can't get his stimulus plan initiated, which means he has to resort to diversionary wars and able to save the economy because he can't handle emergency measures and deficit reduction as a way for economic reform, which means today the economy will be saved and will lash out in the short term. That means it doesn't matter any sort of long-term strategy or when the debt ceiling gets raised. It's a short-term strategy because it means that it's impossible to get infrastructure and tax reform passed. Will never be passed in this House. The plan throws that in the face and makes it impossible. Tuesday before they say pivot to a tax reform. This is PC. This is just an assertion. They don't have a card to be able to say that. This takes out the uniqueness question because it proves that there's PCs being able to push in our cards as a defective in this task which they have no game on which means the uniqueness determines the direction of the link. There's only a risk that the plan makes it impossible, which means they can't solve the clean energy out. It doesn't make any sense. Rollback means there's no clean energy. I already did that. The impact of the app outweighs because it doesn't matter if we have clean energy if Trump lashes out because he doesn't have the specific impacts that they have. step forward. The impact also massively outweighs because it's about a political scenario. All the intrinsicness arguments. This is half conditionality. You can cross-play other arguments on half conditionality. This makes politics this impossible, which means we can't have a good debate about the current events, which is the only internal link to be able to have a good debate about current events. You can also cross-play other arguments about conditionality. The impact of debate Trump is the exception to the rule, which is the foster evidence statistical analysis, so it's the most aggressive, least known president in history. Small provocation shows war. Dressner does not take out argument, just as economic independence. The impact obviously takes that out. The foster evidence is great. From the Virginia Military Institute has statistical analysis, which definitely outweighs in credibility of Northwestern at 17.
813, right now. regulatory offsets to say than the policies.
Alright, is everybody good?
Great.
Warming used too late to solve the salvage evidence says that the IPCC model slightly overestimate the rate of warming, not to a degree where it doesn't matter, simply to a degree where if we create an emissions pathway consistent with the Paris Agreement, we can reduce emissions sufficiently by 2050 and 2100 to avoid 2 degrees and definitely get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. There, one is from the AEI, who is a joker who has that kind of incentive not to exaggerate the inability to solve warming. He's also not citing the IPCC, just citing one EPA model. Obviously, it's far better than those things. Warming causes extinction. They consider interacting tipping points, make it uniquely like this high evidence says they overall adaptive capacity compile one another, make extinction like the consensus of science proves there are tipping points in 4 to 6 degrees is enough to cause extinction. Climate 14 and those are certainly application possibility. 4 degrees racing low, 40 by feet, lose rate, vegetation, action 6 degrees. As I said, most tipping points like these to make up from frost. Times become existential crisis. Comment does not give the answer where all of us are not convinced of one most dangerous civilization. That also answers adaptation because the rate and degree of warming is simply too great for adaptation to be able to deal with it. The cast evidence from the Cato Institute and Manhattan Institute, funded by the Koch brothers. Obviously, you should reject it. Now, warming causes wars. The Shepard evidence undermines state stability, causes them to seek nuclear weapons for stability in an unstable world, which drives confident proliferation. The Tetra evidence they're reading is about previous warming was a slight increase, but future warming will get worse and trigger those conflicts. That's the Shepard evidence. The cast evidence was in that about the leadership advantage. The plan solves genuine leadership by creating a binding strategy in the United States which commits structural Paris. Even if he's talked about rollback the CP, the plan counteracts his recent moves. The light evidence says that he proves U.S. understanding and gives us credibility in the Paris Agreement. Even if we would have withdrawn from Paris in the past, or other agreements in the past, that's a reason the status quo is not perceived as credible because there is a totally voluntary agreement that can't be withdrawn by the plan. It was a binding legal obligation which is much more difficult to roll back and involves the entirety of Congress imposing that obligation, which is a dramatic change from the status quo, which increases his credibility. This is all analytics. You should have an incredibly low threshold for this argument. The argument that will kill Trump and kill Paris, and within is about a certain congressman warning us to decrease our commitment to Paris. The plan reverses that and codifies our current commitment to terrorism. In fact, it goes nuclear. ISIS is searching for a nuclear weapon. They're scouring around for radioactive material. They can hire scientists, which allows them to get a radioactive bomb concentration. Mueller and Suez from 2012 before ISIS. The Dresdner evidence. It does take out their D because it says global trade is resilient and economic linkages can prevent conflict. If that's true, there's an economic incentive for Trump not to go to war because there is fundamental economic linkages that prevent the but they've conceded the internal link was that other countries will impose tariffs on us if we pull out from Paris, which causes Trump lash out because he'll retaliate to those tariffs. So it turns the DA and the impact if it takes out disease caused station burnout doesn't occur because the long range transportation can cause diseases to escape that local extinction. That's Bar-Yam Commission. Extend permutation to the plan that as a result of the comment, the comment recommends the plan, and then Congress via it when the vote is come up for when it comes up for a vote, it solves certainty because it does the plan certainty, so it doesn't sever from those things. It solves the net benefit because it does the plan after the commission recommendation, so it is viewed as Congress accepting the commission recommendation solves all their net benefit. Obviously, the only distinction is immediacy. Immediacy is a bad basis for competition because it allows the next to get delayed comments, which are terrible for offense. Allows them to retreat to those terrible comments. Normal means competition. The permutation clarifies what normal means is because the counter was the only one who introduced the idea of a commission, so we get to permute into that, which solves the normal means arguments and solves the net benefit. That was about now drop down to the links to politics slash solve either it links to politics or it doesn't solve because either Congress because Congress will reject a recommendation that they don't want to do if they're right. The fiscal hawks perceive the plan is really bad that they will not accept the commission. Commissions on already politicized issues don't solve cause greater backlash. Campbell too is where to recommend commissions or manifest solutions to the problems which are by the only state lobbies that have already begun to form consensus but of course to solve problems. NDT the issue majority part of the compromise sources and the result of the constitution the report did nothing for action in Congress. The first card they read on the page at the top is about the BRAC, but that was about a specific commission on which there was already consensus. The counterplan is different. Mayor 7 impact commissions have a poor record. They actually should result less of an impact commission maybe access where it's on goals plus steps and plus making authority of the commission or the president and not apply to commission on a goal form where there's intense controversy over goals and so policy that means the counterplan doesn't result in the plans and links to all office. The Arnold evidence on the other counterplan they also conceded it says that confusion and misleading goals make Paris not make voluntary commitments not credible, so the comments perceived as confusion and an inability for the US to clarify its commitment. So any fight in Congress is sufficient to take out the solvent test. There's no new 2 hours because the 1 hour or the block didn't answer that argument on the other counterplan. The regulatory office DA. It doesn't take out the case. Number one is they've conceded the plan federal regulation doesn't require any offsets because it's legislation, not a legislative rule implemented by the agency, so it doesn't link to Trump's executive order. I think the block explicitly conceded that argument, so they can't possibly go for a regulatory offset argument. Second is the market is driving emission reduction down. The one is renewables are penetrating utilities, and utilities are invested in those renewable penetration, so emissions will be reduced even if Trump rolls back regulation at the federal level. The plan also solves all of their rollback credibility arguments on the other floor by imposing a binding legal obligation which overwhelms his ability to roll back debt ceiling. The healthcare panel destroys it, annihilates the debt ceiling, and destroys the rest of the agenda by making Trump and the GOP look totally incompetent and crushes the deal, making it takes out their fiscal hawks argument. Fiscal hawks like Paul Ryan base their entire legislative strategy around rolling back healthcare, and then it exploded in their faces. Here's their card that it crushes GOP unity. Goldstein 325. But the death thing was left as a control, making sure that the deal of hand for healthcare shows that any party issues are significant. The bill shows that internal parties dispute. No, the argument that the healthcare was a regulatory issue, not an economic one, is total BS. The plan is a regulatory issue, and if that's not economic, then the plan doesn't link to their shit about tax reform and infrastructure, healthcare, pounds tax reform, and infrastructure. Cameras 321. Trump looking towards the first major political win. One Republican Congress healthcare fails fast, and we cost Obama's healthy. Trump did stop the face of professional healthcare, but the setting Trump has custody regulation, infrastructure, healthcare, carries infrastructure, infrastructure, and tax reform, and reduce regulation. The plan is also not a major fiscal issue. It doesn't require any more spending, so it doesn't trade off with their fiscal hawks argument. This is totally made up. Now, debt ceiling passage is inevitable. Patsy says that everyone agrees the ceiling has to be raised. Even Trump and the Treasury sector are on board. Even the GP doesn't want a showdown in the first year of the presidency, so they won't gamble with the U.S. economy just because Trump has legislation that has no real economic effect beyond what's already occurring. The last arguments was newly clarified in the one as a pure last argument. The BTA's argument takes this out. They've conceded that other questions will BTA as what's caused the Trump last out internal into the D. No new to our arguments. The Foster arguments at the very bottom of the flow is bad because it attempts to code things like his mental complexity, which is terrible, and you have no way of doing stats on those things to prove that their statistics are totally bunk, and they have no way of quantifying the risk of last out. After condition is not a voting issue. Not going for that argument. The Dresden arguments also proves resiliency is sufficient to sustain the use economy. What?
Haslam, read it.
No diversion anymore. Haslam 17. Fixed points over standard this reform policy, even if it's or American private constrained by public also used in the effects of day, or reform policy based on federal conservation PhD run. Well, I didn't finish that card. Yeah, that's marked reluctance to use it.
Reluctance to use it. 340.
Yep. the politics actually counterplan, the regulations, disadd, politics, warming, leadership. The counterplan. The counterplan, regulations, politics, warming, leadership. Is anyone not ready? Counterpoint not going forward, we'll consider the permutation just as a competition. There's no offensive of the regulations. It's at first that they conceded that the plan is not a regulation which allows Trump to circumvent the entirety of the app. This is an easy way you can vote negative on presumption because they have fundamentally mishandled this in the 1 AR no. Due to AR extrapolations because my 2 AR strategy was based on this, which is you should allow new evaluations because there's evidence indicates that Trump gets to choose what happens to the plan because they just indicate that they would not be a regulation, so they just get to meet the cap. This means Trump can do whatever he wants. That means that if they say, hey, you have to decrease electricity consumption from this energy source, he can ramp up things like oil from other energy sources. This because he can inevitably offset the plan through things like subsidies and things like making fossil fuels so profitable even after trying to meet the Paris Agreement, which is only a risk that he can circumvent the entirety of the plan and still find worse, which to screw up the environment. The second evidence is the EPA is collapsing in the status quo because they've indicated the EPA collapses, and they've conceded that they've made the argument that EPA collapses in the which means there is no way to effectively implement the affirmative, which means there only risk that the app doesn't do anything because nothing gets done because the EPA doesn't have enough people to staff, which is only a risk that the affirmative never gets to operate.
It means they don't have the international.
Yeah, it means they also don't have any international sovereignty, especially because if there isn't seen as an agency that can actually even implement the plan, that there's obviously no way that the plan would ever be perceived. Now the politics is at first is a uniqueness, but you can group it. All the healthcare debate. This is all speculation about short-term issues as far as they said that we see that Trump is focused on economic issues like tax reform. They believe to get that those passes enough to prevent diversion and last. So it doesn't matter if debt ceiling inevitably gets passed because the plan causes a shift in Republican economic strategy from buying on Trump's economic stimulus to deficit reduction. They've conceded that these threats are coming down the status quo, but Trump's CC is sufficient to solve ACHC failure is pricing now and happened because of fights from the far right hawks, which is uniqueness really for us and not them. None of their uniqueness arguments assumes being linked to the plan goals of Trump carefully stemming the strategy in Congress perceives him as running back on his plan to make jobs. The plan is clearly an economic issue. Trump's main argument for bringing back jobs is to stop bad environmental policy like the Paris Agreement. That is their first arguments because it means that even if fiscal hawks are fighting, it's only a risk that this has already been factored in. There's only a risk that unity is what causing unions for us and not the other way around. Now they say the plan is not a fiscal issue. Obviously, the plan is a fiscal issue. I answer that above because the plan would obviously have to implement more than just cuts in order to be able to do anything. We couldn't just cut all of our oil production and not have some sort of renewable alternative, which we have to obviously invest in because those don't exist in the status quo, which means there's only a risk that the plan causes a massive increase in these sort of prices, which means Trump can't get his other stimulus packages, which causes fiscal hawks to revolt, which means he has to use things like diversionary war in the first place. Now they say Trump is on board. They say Trump is on board. There's no showdown. Yes, there's a showdown. The GOP won't be able to fight because things like fiscal trigger the plan, trigger debt ceiling because there's no way that they want to do it because they have to inevitably put on things like spending cuts in order to be able to offset the cost of the plan, which means Trump gets pissed because he can't push his own agenda, which means he causes a diversionary lash out because he's trying to win popular approval, especially if he's not getting any of his agenda reform. The AHC unitary is uniquely good for us because the failure is uniquely good for us because it means that because he's failed on this legislative authority, it means he has to get all of his other campaign promises done if he wants to have any sort of legitimacy. Otherwise, it uniquely incentivizes the risk that he goes to war in the first place. Now, they see lash out because BTA is Trump. The trade defense proves that this would never escalate, which means there's no risk of this, but also there's no risk of BTA installation. They have not provided a unique scenario which this happens. If anything, when a BTA is slapped on the U.S., Trump just puts one on other countries. There's not a risk that he uniquely lashes out. However, economic issues like the plan in world which he can't get infrastructure spending and is trying to win over his popular approval uniquely causes him to lash out at those other countries, causes nuclear war and intervention as a wish is distinct from their BTs here, which is there's no risk of a thumper. Now they say the foster evidence is bad. You can group all these next two arguments. The foster evidence is good. You to prefer because it's the most qualified. It cites what his policy campaigns have done or what his decisions and statements have said, which means it's the most indicative of what a Trump war will do. It also indicates that there is a unique risk of diversion war because he is unchecked by the conventional norms of politics, which is the reason as to why their evidence about restraint is terrible. It's not about Trump. It just says that there might be some things that prevent foreign policy. However, it doesn't indicate the things that Trump can do in order to be able to rally support. He won the presidency, for God's sakes. It obviously proves that he has some credibility in order to be able to win this stuff. The econ impact turns the entirety of the case. First, it turns any sort of credibility because if we don't raise the debt ceiling, Trump goes to war with other countries. If any of these scenarios happen, it means that the impact isn't. It means that all their impacts are not because we can't get enough of the U.S. that we can't get U.S. leadership or anyone to follow on. Second, is it turns off warming. Obviously, we're not going to be able to follow through on commitments in renewable technologies if the entire global economy is collapsed because the U.S. Because Trump has launched a nuke and someone because he's pissed about infrastructure or anything else. Warming. First, I'm going to extend the one evidence as evidence is there's too many other countries. This evidence assumes APA and IPCC models, which is even if it's funded, it still assumes the aggregate data, which is why you should refer. It indicates that if the U.S. were to cut all of its emissions from a place, the U.S. and Japan and Europe were to cut all of their emissions, it would still be insufficient in order to be able to stop. They have no reason why this would be able to stop. They just say that the next argument I'm going to send is that warming doesn't constitute for the evidence because ours is the most recent. It's for literally from 4 days ago. Their evidence that they read in 20 hours is terrible and it's from 2014 and doesn't assume the recent ability to be able to do things like adapt in the status quo, which none of their models assume. All their models assume a world without adaptation, which would obviously be bad, but that's not the world of the status quo. So they've not instilled any sort of world. They have not instilled any sort of warrant for why any sort of warming conflicts happen, which means there's only a risk. You should default to our specific analysis. The 1 and the 2 NC evidence I read on this is phenomenal, which means even if it's from an institute that's primarily funded, it uses lots of other factors like the innovation that other countries have in their infrastructure that are preventing mass migration from causing collapse in the status quo, which means it's uniquely key to theirs. This is the only warrant they extend, which means we are the only ones with defense and things like we are the only ones with answers to things like migration, which proves that migration isn't going to cause any war. There's no risk of warming causing any sort of extinction because all of there's literally not going to be any catastrophe at anything like beyond 5 degrees, which they don't have any access to. The leadership advantage first is that I'm going to extend the 1NC solvency because they have fundamentally handled this. This evidence indicates that there is talks on Capitol Hill that will raise international awareness because there is an argument to work within Paris in order to break it down from the inside. Their evidence obviously doesn't assume this because our argument indicates that when we follow through on Paris, countries don't see that as real because we're just going to tear it down from the inside. So even if we make it binding, countries say that, hey, look, now they're finally going to comply so that they can break Paris, which means that inevitably turns both of the advantages that they have not handled this evidence very well. Now, I'm also going to say there's no risk of terror. This was the 1NC evidence indicates, or 1NC and 2NC evidence indicates there's no incentive, there's no innovation. They've also not answered that they don't have an actual scenario for how ISIS ever gets these weapons or how they fund them, especially in which ISIS is losing this cycle. The next argument I'm going to send is the no impact to trade in goods and drugs and evidence because it indicates there's an independence. Also, disease burns out and there's no risk that it causes extinction because things like containment means there's only a risk that the disad outweighs this because we run substantial risk of the case.
We have 4
I wrote 424.
Yeah, that's right.
424.
Yeah.
been at 3, but they weren't tightened when they were standing up there. Do you see what I mean?
I understand, but like,
It's good enough. Okay, the order's going to be the warming advantage, then it's going to be the leadership advantage, regulatory offsets, debt ceiling.
Sorry, offsets politics.
Yes, offsets, politics. Warming advantage, then the leadership advantage, regulatory offsets, disad, and then the politics disad. Okay, is that pretty good?
Wait, hold on.
Oh, sorry, I did not hear you.
Yeah,
Okay.
my voice cracked.
Warming is the only scenario for extinction. Their disad relies on an uncertain comment about diversionary war causing lash out. We have an internal link into that, but they have no internal link into warming. And it definitively causes extinction. All of our evidence is descriptive of how it ends humanity, even if the time frame is long, whereas none of their evidence rises to the fore of saying every single person would die as a result of a diversionary war. Now, first argument, there are the too many countries argument does not assume our internal link, which is about Paris. The whole thesis of our advantage is that compliance is occurring right now, which means other countries are moving on Paris, and it's a question of whether the U.S. involvement is sufficient to solve. Now, the second argument is that their evidence assumes an EPA model, which is not about the plan. The Zyker evidence assumes things like 17% reductions, whereas our internal links are about ambitions and rationing up, and starting with the 28% reduction as discussed in Crossix. The bias of their evidence does matter because models can be tweaked with, whereas our salvage evidence is independent and cites a consensus of models that says that the Paris pathway specifically, which their evidence does not contemplate, can result in ratcheting down. Adaptation is not sufficient to solve our evidence. Our Schultz evidence and Sheffrin evidence and Kai evidence all say that interacting tipping points means that the impact of warming is underestimated. Sea level rises will rise 1 to 2 meters, which adaptation cannot overcome. Again, this evidence is from the Manhattan Institute, which means you should reject it. They haven't disputed the point that those people are funded by climate deniers. Their Zyker evidence literally at the end says that warming is not anthropogenic. The conflicts are now going for the bias. I've already answered. Their innovations can be tweaked. Catastrophe is going to happen. Things like biodiversity collapses as per the impact evidence they read in the 1 and C that we turned by saying warming caused extinction, but also through things like collapse, heat waves, and droughts, which all cause crises that cause a knock-on effect that interact. That was the Kai evidence. The leadership advantage, not going for it. The only argument I'm going to answer is that the U.S. will undermine Paris from within because it impacts our warming arguments. However, this evidence says that somebody is circulating a bill that will change our INDC. However, the plan makes the current INDC binding as per Paris, which means that we have to comply with it. They haven't connected how that bill then shifts the perception and what's occurring in the status quo. Regulatory offsets. The regulatory offsets arguments are a misunderstanding of what the affirmative does. They haven't connected the dots well enough for you to vote on this taking out the affirmative. First of all, you should look back to when we see Crossix when we explain how the plan actually establishes regulations. Callahan's argument is that the current emissions are being market driven right now, which means even if Trump did things like expand permitting or create incentives for drilling, the markets are too locked into renewables because they're so price competitive and they see a future in that. That's the worth and the Goldwyn evidence. That means that the only time when the EPA actually has to assess and evaluate whether regulation should happen is years from now when we have to ratchet up our INDCs, which and recreate a set of policies that fulfill the next round of emissions negotiations. At that point, Trump will be out of the administration, and even if it's done by that, the plan is legislation, which means it's not limited to agency regulations, which means there's other legal mandates that mean that the EPA is not the only enforcement mechanism. Also, they've conceded that the states are the ones who'd be pushing for emissions regulations, which means none of this makes sense even if Trump opens that. It's completely market driven. Debt ceiling. The debt ceiling pounders drop down to the terminal impact arguments. First, there's a few problems with the impact to this disset. First is our internal links take this out. The ROM evidence says other countries will impose tariffs on the U.S. that we've perceived as not credible on climate change. Even if we don't solve this, this is an inevitable result of the affirmative, or this is an inevitable result in the status quo, which means it takes out their impact but not ours because we'll answer their late-breaking turns case impact analysis. However, it just says that we'll be treated like apartheid South Africa and will be universally sanctioned, which means it causes Trump to lash out and backlash because his global diplomatic credibility is in the tank. This isn't limited to trade ties, which means it accesses their scenario, but they don't access ours. Second, the Dresner evidence takes out the dissent because it says there are global economic linkages that prevent conflict. If that's true, there's zero incentive for Trump to lash out because he knows the cost would be enormous. The Haslam card says there's major public resistance to international military operations, especially after Iraq, which stops adventurism. Their internal link is super dumb. The two are literally made the argument that not getting infrastructure passed causes Trump to start a nuclear war, which the link differential between that and healthcare is so minimal that you should feel comfortable rejecting the impact. Now, the Trent's case analysis is all you know. You should reject it because we would have read cards about the economic motivations of other countries early on in the debate, but Paris commitments are locked in and other countries see the momentum on climate change, which means that's necessarily going to happen. Even if it doesn't turn more in the plan overwhelms the signal of credibility from the politics to just because we don't get an infrastructure bill passed doesn't mean other countries won't reduce emissions since we've legally committed to do so. Also because that wrecks investment and fosters innovation, which strains the commitment, and countries saying it would help their economies. The pounder. This crushes the entire agenda. Trump just failed on the issue that the GOP has rallied on throughout the entire Obama administration. Goldstein evidence doesn't establish the Goldilocks stance they wanted to because it's just descriptive of GOP tensions post-healthcare. It says that the inter-party discipline is minimal and inter-party disputes are significant. Our petty piece and Jacobs evidence quantifies those tensions and says that they deal a total blow to the rest of the agenda, which is especially true because the internal links that they've established to get to their terminal impact include losing on things like infrastructure and tax reform. We have read that the Campos evidence says that healthcare itself pounds those things. It cannot possibly be priced in because their only uniqueness evidence is pre all the healthcare shit show that happened yesterday. It's from February 21st. Now, this is even truer because their link evidence is so broad about economic issues and what could trigger infighting and PC loss, and it's from February, which means it doesn't assume the loss of PC post the plan. We actually access a better internal link from the pounder because fiscal hawks are more mad about things like ACA because it was an economic issue about things like cutting the costliness of healthcare and the burden of social spending on the government, which means it's uniquely likely to more trigger, whereas their description of the internal link is just about jobs, which means it's far more likely to pound the rest of the agenda. Last couple arguments, this is that pounds over Republican issues. If you can't find a quantifiable distinction between the plan and the pounders, you should feel comfortable voting half on this.
it is a 3-0 decision for the affirmative from Northwestern. I'm happy to start. I think the ass is pretty big, and there's not a lot here to one. I'll say I think structurally the impact of the DA just needs more development. Aside from kind of the 2AR pointing out that some of these terms of the case arguments are a little new or whatever, there's a more fundamental question, which is just like you're kind of hanging a lot on this one impact card that just doesn't get everywhere you need to be. And in some debates that's not super relevant, but in this one especially, when you're kind of versus the all-time existential impact of our day, you probably need to get it to big global nuclear and maybe even read Ev, and that causes climate, it's not always important for every debate, but in this one, it is. And so it's just like, once I get past, kind of your D on the case, which is not nothing, but it's like, once I assign pretty decent risk of app solvency and a big impact, it's just, I don't know how much the uniqueness debate on healthcare or any of that kind of stuff really matters. Even if you won, kind of all of it, I just don't know that it's enough. And so I think more development in the block is just kind of a structural question you gotta deal with to get back in the game. I mean, I thought y'all debated really well, and we're making good decisions. It's just kind of that needed to be a component there. I don't know, a couple more specific things, I guess, but that's like the important thing to me. I thought, I don't know, 2AR, if I would have kicked leadership, for example, it's like we have, it's like warming, yes, big, but leadership was nice in terms of having more short term and kind of things that interacted, and I know you still used it for uniqueness against the DA, which was important. Economic recession coming did seem to be a problem that you did a lot of work to try to separate your impact from other things, but you read the Ev, it's kind of economic motivations for conflict. But I don't know, there just wasn't that much in the 2R, and it's all. And I don't know.
Do you mind if I ask your thoughts on that? Because I definitely, after the 2R immediately ended, was leadership seems pretty good, but thinking about it, was worried that if you all did think that the regulatory offset stuff messed with the app, there was a larger risk it messed with leadership since it was more signal based than it would with the mechanics of solving US warming.
Yeah, but it's defense.
Sure.
And
that's fair. Yeah.
And I didn't actually really think. I thought I had to get past that argument for either advantage.
That's
pretty clearly. Yeah, I thought I just didn't see it wasn't a huge time investment, and it got you another buffet of impacts. And the thing that I've recognized on this topic is they're just judges who are just not feeling warming in a lot of debates, and a lot of debates get decided on, oh, that's far off and a little vague and short-term war, and just I don't know why you risk it if you didn't really need to. And I'll tell you, if Pauline's getting slow in 2AR, I'm quitting debate. So I don't know, just speed it up a little, and
I can do that for you.
And
Okay. You said people are deciding on warming is slow and far off. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it was good, but it just seemed needlessly risky And it's not like you got so many things in the DA either.
When you're saying speed it up, would you have envisioned the 2A going for leadership stuff and warming impacts?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're just saying add more arguments.
Yeah, leadership, group it, like we solve it, and then all these impacts.
Okay.
It's like, yes, disease causes extinction, and yes, cyber war, and yes, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think you should have gone for like the other, like the war scenario that you had on warming in the 2AR. That might have helped out a little bit too if you weren't really feeling the leadership advantage. Just because I don't really think like the R's and the 2 and R were really indicative of the 1AR analysis. It was just like answer to migration, but nothing really else. And like the 1AR had this prolif R that's not really responded to in like state failure. So that could have also factored into the decision. But ultimately, I think there's a fairly large risk of the warming advantage. And there's like a risk of the DA, but I don't really think it's very large. The rollback wasn't really part of my decision. I think legal codification R's really weren't very well fleshed out, but I think that market lock-in that you went for in the 2AR probably takes out any risk of Trump rollback in the short term, which means that long term Trump's out of office doesn't matter. Warming advantage, I just said you should have gone for the roll arcs, but I don't think you, sorry, I typed things up. Yeah, the internal link I think you're winning a large risk of. Other countries complying now, but waiting for US to follow on. Those legally binding necks mean that they're bringing us to the tipping point. The only real argument is that other countries don't release it. But I don't think that's the argument that they're making. It's just that Trump withdrawal now crushes momentum. Other countries to follow up, but the mech of the act kind of like reverses around that. So I think you need to go for more of the arguments that you're making in the 2 and C instead of the ones that you went in the 2 and R, and that might have helped you out a little bit. I agree on the DA. I think that one of the issues is the 1 R is just a little bit big. I think that taking the case page kind of hurts you in the 1 R because it doesn't really get you to flesh out like any of the impact level. Or I'm also kind of questionable on the link level in the 2 and R as well. I think the Thumper debate was like contextualized differently in several different speeches, which was a little bit confusing, but I think the 2AR analysis makes the most sense when she's just like it should have triggered lash out because this was his main agenda item. Debt ceiling is about finance hawks, which means that it probably won't trigger the diversionary wars that you're going for in the 2AR, or in the 2 and R. So large risk of warming, risk of DA not too big, but good big.
Do you mind if I really quickly ask, in what ways did you think that the 2AC 1AR and 2AR weren't consistent on the pattern debate, just so that we don't do that?
So the 1AR, I kind of have it as like more of a uniqueness pounder than an impact.
Oh, I see what you're
saying. And like the 2AR analysis on the impact level I think is really good, and I think that should have been like the 1AR contextualization too. But like it's still in the 1AR, it's just like not really fleshed out.
That makes sense.
I think that the risk that the app solves a sufficient amount of warming impact is larger than the risk of the outputs of the DA. I think my main issues first is I don't think there's a very good answer to the uniqueness for the impact that you're going for about trade wars inevitable. That they're sitting throughout the debate on the leadership stuff. I thought that was a fine use of an extension of the leadership advantage. I don't think that the utility is winning the solvency for that advantage. I think it's the uniqueness presses that sort of let you play around on the chessboard. That was my interpret. I don't know, maybe I'm just lazy about solving the if. And so I think that needs to have a better answer in the 2 and R. I also think that the uniqueness for the disad and the thumper question is much better in terms of characterization by the app than by the negative. My biggest issue throughout this thing is that I think the DA is interesting. It has a lot of cool, really like moving parts that deal with what I think seem to be like problems with the politics disad generally that are endemic just because of this weird world that we're in right now. However, I think that you're like 3 steps ahead in predicting those problems in explaining your analysis. There's never a point at which the negative just sort of like fronts a story that I offer initial investment in. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but like even in the 1 in R explanation, you're like, if there's like, if they win this, then that means this. There's never a moment that's just like, this is the status quo, the plan messed that up because impact. And I think that that's important because otherwise you're getting bogged down in answering the app answers and not selling something to the negative. So, or that is to vote for you. So I think that going forward, the most important thing is just having a moment where you're like, this is our argument and this is why it makes sense. And then sort of dealing with these issues. Because my biggest problem was just like, if I voted negative, I have no idea what the story is that like, what is the world that happens, you know? And so a more coherent explanation of that would be better. I think after that helps a lot of the inefficiencies that were kind of in the 1 in R on the politics DA. You need to be reading more cards about this econ distinction. I also think that this is maybe not the best route because my healthcare was negotiated under reconciliation measures. So I don't understand why that wouldn't be an econ scenario question. And like this obviously wasn't in the debate, but that was something big in my mind that I didn't understand. So, absent a story of like what I think the world of the DISAT is, these like solvency presses about the app are interesting, but not sufficient to have the threshold for. And I think that the app, sufficiently solves warming.
Do you think, I just have a quick question. So I guess like in the 2 and R, do you think it would have been better to just like not go to the like regulations, like that sort of like solvency argument and just spend more time on like,
I was very confused by what you were
Okay.
utility, or like I understand the end utility, but what the reference point for that was, and like the big explanation of what happens, and also like absent, you didn't even include cards in the doc afterwards or anything, so that, I don't know, maybe I was just missing some piece, but I thought it,
sounds good.
there were other places that could have been,
Okay.
freshened up.
Yeah, you just need more ev to flesh that out to say all these other things that the plan doesn't fiat out of would undermine our credibility, which I don't think is. I think you're probably on the right side of that. Fiat is a big stick, like making